Hi everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, where you are. Myself, Anila Noor, and I'm super happy to have our session of Together We Lead, Together We Nurture Our Earth, Our Future. The purpose of this webinar is how we can connect different knowledges, how we connect different expertise, and how we can connect different conversation for all the people like me, like you, who are not technical expert in that climate, especially climate finance, but we want to understand how, if we've been affected by climate disaster, climate change, how we can negotiate our position and how we can create inclusive advocacy. I'm super happy to have this conversation here. And I'm also super excited because the two panelists who are joining me from other part of the world from South Korea, they are here. It's quite struggle to bring them online because of our technical problems of difficulties, but I'm super happy to introduce you and going right away in the introduction. Stephanie and Alina, welcome. Thank you so much for having. We are super excited to have you here.
Thank you very much, Anila. It's lovely to join you. And the technical problems were not on your side, they're on the GCF side and our very strict password system. So thank you for making it possible for us to join.
Indeed, indeed.
Delighted to be with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I'm super happy to have Stephanie and Lenny, and I'm not gonna do actually introduction by myself. I really want to give you, because this is as New Woman Connector, for us to give you the mic and give you the power to describe how you wanna introduce yourself. So I will start with Stephanie, and then I will request Eleni to introduce yourself for our audience. Please, Stephanie.
Thank you, and hello everyone. I'm calling from the Berlin airport, where I've been traveling. I think I've done 14 countries in the last 11 days. So I'm just about to fly home to Seoul and see my family. Travel is a constant feature of life. Unfortunately, when one is working in climate, it seems hypocritical. But I'm really pleased to join you all today. My background, I've been working for about 25 years. I'm Australian, but my background has always been working at the intersection of strategy, impact, and vulnerability. And my specialty is working in conflict or post-conflict countries, working from local communities right up to head of state level to make sure that when a state is emerging into a democratic function, that it includes all citizens in that process. So that they're part of the reform. And at GCF, I lead our portfolio on making sure that we're investing in those very fragile and conflict-affected settings. I'll hand to Eleni.
Eleni, are you there? Seems like she has some technical problem, or
Maybe some audio problems.
Can you hear me?
yes, now. Yes, perfect.
Oh, thank God. So what I was saying is thank you very much, Anila and Steph. So my name is Eleni Kyrou. I'm a Greek by origin. I've been working my whole life in the international development sphere. I'm currently the head of sustainability and inclusion with GCF. I've done many things in my life, but two things have always both driven me and moved me. The first one is to contribute in even a little way to creating some impact. So I need a purpose, basically, to be working, and I see myself as a conduit for those who cannot be heard directly at the spheres at which I operate. So I'm there really to amplify and transmit the voices of those who are most vulnerable, be it in political with small p power, or in financial means, or in representation, or whatever. Back to you, Anila.
Thank you so much, Alini and Stephanie. Thank you so much. Indeed, in your introduction, you highlighted the importance how we can connect with the community, especially with the climate finance. That's what a main purpose of this discussion. As I said, I myself, as a migrant refugee-led organization running, we feel sometimes underconfident. We don't feel the place or expertise to talk about it. That's what we are trying to challenge how we can break down the jargon, how we can make us simplify an easy person, like common person who, especially displaced women living in Uganda, living in Bangladesh, living in any kind of difficulties, how they can understand why it is important for them to understand how this conversation is shaping and how they can advocate more inclusively. So I will jump into my first question. I will start with you, Stephanie, and obviously Eleni with you, because we really want to understand how climate finance means for a person who's living in a situation like flood situation or a very displacement setting, how they can understand what is the finance mean.
It's a great question, and it's a very important question, because, of course, the communities that Eleni and I try to work with through GCF, and Anila, you and your colleagues work with directly, are those who are the witnesses of climate change, the experiencers of climate change, those who stand in that intersection between not what is coming, but what is already there and the impacts it has on day-to-day life. But often there's not an understanding that that is caused by something that is a global phenomenon, that is beyond the local, and that people experiencing the tragedy of climate change have not actually caused. So it's a very complex sphere of interaction, actually. But if you allow me, I'll take one step back and just quickly introduce the Green Climate Fund, so the context in which I make my remarks. Before we get into the substance of the matter. So the Green Climate Fund was set up as one of the financing mechanisms or the financing bridges of the Paris Agreement back in 2015. People listening may remember that the developed world made a promise to the developing world to deliver $100 billion annually of climate finance. That promise was made in 2015. It took years to deliver on, if in fact we have actually really delivered on them. There are all kinds of clever mathematical equations that allow us to claim we have delivered. I'm not quite so sure. But at that stage, the Green Climate Fund was appointed as one of the funds that would collect money from developed countries like the UK or Germany or Japan or Italy, and hold that in a fund, an investment fund, and then distribute that to countries who need that funding to pay for the action that they take to deal with climate change. Both the action that they take to stop further effects of climate change, so to change the kind of energy that's used so that it doesn't cause further carbon emissions, we call that mitigation, or in adaptation, which is how do I actually deal with the change that's already happened. And we have a responsibility, therefore, to be stewards and look after a large amount of public money. We have $18 billion committed. And this is all from people's taxes that are collected in the developing world. And we provide that to developing countries. So we provide it to Bangladesh, to India, to Somalia, to Madagascar, to Georgia, to Albania, all around the world. And we have a responsibility to provide half of that money towards mitigation. So how do we stop further carbon emissions? And half of that money towards adaptation. How do we live with climate change without suffering the worst effects of it? And GCF has been operating for 10 years. This is our 10th year anniversary. We have more than 330 projects in more than 150 countries. So we're spread across the world. And we fund everything from energy transition, transport and infrastructure, right through to livelihoods, agriculture, water. So from the big urban resilience pieces that may change the landscape of how people live in cities, right down to very small local community-led projects that change how people live in villages and in their communities. So it has a very broad purpose and a broad mandate. And we can also fund not just government, so the public sector, but we can also fund the private sector. And that means that we can fund both the government, who has ultimate responsibility for the security and safety of citizens, and the private sector, which also has the responsibility to making sure that it's acting ethically and sustainability to help people's lives improve. So that's the background of our remarks today, and happy to take any questions, from the audience later on about that. But GCF is deeply committed to working as close to the ground as possible. We don't implement projects ourselves. We don't have staff people on the ground, but we work through implementing partners. They can be big UN organisations, right down to locally led or national institutions. And they're the ones we're deeply committed to getting on board and receiving our funding, so that we can have confidence that our money is reaching those who are really living with the day-to-day impacts of climate change. I'll stop there and hand back to you, Anila.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's very important to understand, and thank you for sharing the history and the background of GCF. Eleni, would you like to add on? But I wanna add on one question for you, especially if you not only help us to understand the climate finance, but also maybe if you touch upon the just transition, because you are talking about inclusion and how we can break down this. Sometime for the community exclusion, so how you can also touch upon a little bit just transaction, shaped by most affected people. So how you wanna help us to understand the climate finance with that just transaction lens?
Thank you so much, Anila. So just to say, I'll add a couple of grains on on the very comprehensive picture that Stephanie put out there, and then I'll come to your question. So what I wanted to stress in the way that we work is also that we have endorsed the guidelines for locally led climate action, which means that we are trying certainly to nudge and support the entities to which we lend, or to which we provide grants, to really engage with the local level. And currently, we're also putting forward, in fact, next week. We're putting forward a whole proposition on country ownership, which is, again, it's us not sitting here in Songdo and determining how things happen and where financial flows go, but very much thinking of ownership sitting with the countries, that ownership being as representative as possible. We're looking at the guidelines for locally led climate action. We've recently consulted on them and will come out with them, hoping that they will support those in our portfolio who really want to go closer and further down on the ground with communities on the ground on how certain proposals and projects that will seek climate financing from us will be crafted and designed so that they are, they entail and they embrace more the views from the ground. And in parallel, in my capacity, I'm leading also the work stream on the indigenous peoples policy. There also, we're looking at how that finance is not just going to the countries concerned, that it doesn't just tap into the concerns and voices of, communities on the ground, but it actually also, in the case of indigenous peoples, reaches, as directly as possible, indigenous communities. So we are, at the end of the day, we're an organization that works a lot through intermediated finance. So we go through many hoops of other actors. So we're removed, us in Songdo, we're removed several degrees from the action on the ground, but we're trying through these measures to really encourage the community level to benefit, to be heard, and to be able to access our financing closer. In terms of just transition, precisely these mechanisms that I've just laid out will allow the design of the measures and the nuances, both in what is needed at a particular geographical context or community context, as well as what is done about it, to be a better fit. The risk is that a lot of climate financing comes, first of all, that a lot of climate solutions are conceived somewhere that are not informed by both what the needs really are, as well as what the solutions that are more appropriate are. So following such a design, climate climate finance comes, if you wish, gender blind. It arrives gender blind. It arrives, tailored to, in the case of indigenous peoples, communities, local communities, let's say that it arrives catering to particular actors, but not actors that have different, systems of organizing themselves, different capabilities around fiduciary or administrative systems that they, so we miss out, not we as GCF, but we risk in the climate world of missing out of these actors, both listening, designing, but as well as channeling finance to where is needed. I'll stop here. I don't want to monopolize, but in a nutshell, for me, just transition means that not everybody goes by the same, neither by the same blanket solution at the same time, and offer to do so through the same financial channels, because that's also important. That there is an understanding of things needing to be staged, of that a transition is all about whoever needs to transition needs to be supported in the change of the economy, the change of doing things. And I'll just finish with something that I heard a few weeks back in New York, and I loved it, and it comes from the gender space. When we think about women entrepreneurs, for example, moving forward, just transition and all that, there's a wonderfully unique opportunity when we are now crafting the blue and green economies to actually have women entrepreneurship already plugged in from the beginning under the terms that we, under equal terms, not think of the blue and green economy and then come to the gender question. So, for example, thinking of just transition also speaks to that. Over to you.
Thank you. I saw Stephanie, please jump in.
Yeah, I think, when we use words like just, it's about justice, and that's because climate is a human rights issue. And unfortunately, at the moment, it's an unequally distributed human rights issue. So as I said, when I opened, the people who have done least to cause the changes in the world's atmosphere are the people who feel the effects the most. Take, for instance, Papua New Guinea. This is a country I grew up in as a child. It is a country that is actually, it contributes nothing to the world's carbon burden. In fact, it's carbon negative. It acts as a carbon sink. The incredible biodiversity and natural environment of Papua New Guinea absorbs carbon. Yet it's also one of the first countries to be suffering the effects of climate change. So people on external islands to the mainland, traditional farming communities have had to, and fishing communities have had to leave their islands already. Tens of thousands of people. So this is, again, not a future event, and as your audience will know, because they're living it, and they have had to move into different communities on the mainland, communities that don't follow their own cultural traditions, communities that don't follow the same fishing patterns, don't even harvest the same kind of fish. So a just transition is about justice at its core. It's if we want countries to grow and prosper and people to grow and prosper, it's very clear, without harming the planet while we do it, because we have a choice. We can continue to grow and prosper and do things the wrong way. That's the choice that the developed world has made for the last 200 years of industrialization. Or we can choose to develop and prosper the right way, with the planet and the safety of people at its core. But that can be very expensive, can't it? Imagine if your government, wherever country you are, suddenly said, from next week, everyone has to swap to solar power. How do you afford that? Where do you go to buy a solar machine? Who installs it? So just transition is saying we recognize we have to change the kind of energy we consume to create a better planet, but we're going to do it in a way, as Eleni said, that is staged, that includes everybody. We see great examples of this through some GCF initiatives, particularly in Africa. We have an initiative called Kawasafi, and it's directly this. It's about saying, for people who produce goods, who have small farms, who grow small crops, and who need to access solar power to do that more efficiently and with better energy outcomes for the planet, how do we make sure they can access the new power of the future, solar or wind. And we provide subsidized loans, very, very cheap concessional loans to women, mainly women, who can therefore afford to pay back something, not in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but over 5 to 6 or 7 years. And it doesn't harm the income or the profit they make from their farming activities. So a just transition is putting people and their ability to afford to transition at the centre of all those initiatives. The Indonesian government, for example, when it started to swap over from diesel to other forms of renewable energy, had a social protection program where it subsidised those costs for the first 2 years so that people had time to get accustomed to using new types of energy and the costs that they placed on their households. So it's a way of including people in making the right decisions without suffering even more financially than they are from climate change.
Thank you so much for both of you. I'm going to ask a very critical question because you mentioned how just transition and you are involving more officials, more national level, and being a leading partner for that refugee displacement community. This is my responsibility to ask this question. When me, a refugee woman and displaced woman, with my children, I'm a vulnerable. I'm already in a displacement setting. Being host in a new community, I don't have right to vote, right to have my bank, right to have my basic right to even to have a right for education, right to have even. I have been in different camps, and I recently saw how much it's getting more worse. So, how you feel a woman who are in a vulnerable situation, how they can see this calls opening call when you are saying we want to have a just transition, we have to involve the communities, but they already left out. So how we make sure this vulnerable community feel this calls, this initiative, this discussion is for me and about me. So how we can make sure accountability lens is there. How we saying, Eleni, you mentioned about designing. So it's about power relationship. So already being a displaced, we don't have power. We don't have a agency to showcase because we need resources and sustainability. So how we are making sure we are not leaving behind anyone?
Would you want to take this question? Shall I?
Or maybe I provide the broader background, then hand to you,
Okay.
Eleni. Yeah, Eleni, I think this is Anila. I think this is a really tough question to ask and goes to the heart of the discussion. I can't say with my hand on my heart that GCF has done it correctly in this area. Firstly, we have only a very small portfolio in displacement. So we have 7 projects that look at displacement, and of those 2 that really look at displacement. We have of $18 billion committed, only 186 million committed to issues of displacement at the moment. But we recognise this is one of the most critical issues that we have to deal with. Displacement, as we've already said, is happening, and it will continue to grow in number. And you're absolutely right. Oftentimes, those who've been displaced are in a very unequal power relationship with the host community or the community that has either had to accept them or wanted to accept them. I think that firstly, what we try and do when we're working in these communities or our partners are bringing projects to us from these communities, and you mentioned the role of national governments. Often there can be tension in these relationships between the national government may have a policy around displacement and refugee acceptance, but the local communities who have to embrace that have a very different perspective. So there can be an inbuilt tension from the start between a federal authority and a local authority, and that tension makes itself felt in that community. So when we're looking at project design in these areas, we are looking firstly at climate outcome. We are not a humanitarian fund. So it's not our job to be UNHCR or IOM. Our job is really, what is the climate impact that displaced settings are experiencing? Is it lack of access to energy? Is it lack of access to water and sanitation? Can people grow crops? Do they need to cut down trees for energy sources and those kind of things? So we're always looking at what is the climate angle. And then we're looking at project design that puts in place some kind of governance or organisational framework that allows the local community to do its best on behalf of a federal policy. And we work increasingly with organisations like UNHCR in Tanzania. They are working with us to make sure that energy and livelihoods are provided to a displaced community on the border of Tanzania. We have a project called Hardest to Reach, which is about making sure that microgrids and very small energy supplies are available in some of the trickiest places in the world, including in some refugee camps on the border of Kenya and Somalia. So let me say with honesty, we understand this is a bigger area and a growing area for GCF. Are we dealing with it comprehensively at the moment? I think we have things to learn. That's the value of these discussions too, having input from you and your colleagues about what we need to do better in this area. Eleni, over to you.
Thanks, Steph. Let me then complement. So I haven't drilled down, Anila, on these particular projects that Steph has looked more into. What I can tell you, though, is that we do have a policy, a suite of policies, and one of these is our gender policy. And gender policy is an interesting. Our gender policy is a valuable and very interesting mix, both of compliance elements as well as of, inclusion and impact-oriented elements. And on the compliance elements, what we do expect, and we do have 100% achievement rate so far, but what we do expect to come with each concept note and each funding proposal are two things: a gender analysis, and on the back of that, a gender action plan. A gender action plan that's going to speak to what the proposal that's requesting for our funding will do, and what and how it's going to deliver it. So and then there is going through the hoops. There is those funding proposals go through the very careful consideration of the fund's investment committee. But this is just to say that gender analysis, precisely because it's obligatory, and that gender action plan is not just a box ticking exercise. It does stand, it is reviewed and scrutinized from our end, and we are asking the right questions of who are these, what are the gender dynamics on the ground, what do we do on the back of this analysis? How does this analysis speak to the gender action plan and the ambition of this funding proposal? So I would think that is a strong enough hook for women's organizations to be, to hold on to. I'll stop here. Back to you, Anila. Steph, please.
Yeah, your comment, Eleni, made me think of something here too. And I think this is particularly interesting when we think about displacement through extreme weather events like cyclones and floods. So rapid onset disaster events that cause a rapid displacement. So, displacement can be an adaptation choice. People can choose. And that makes it a positive step if the right support structures are there. But often, as we know, and majorly, it's as a result of either there's a political persecution or there's a conflict situation, or increasingly, there's an extreme weather event. The ironic thing is that of all the extreme weather events that have happened in the past 5 to 6 years, we've been able to accurately predict at least 80% of them, which means we could have a very proactive approach to helping communities move in time and be supported with access to cash or access to food and shelter. But this is a really important part of the funding work that we do into early warning systems, where we work closely with organisations like UNDRR, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, with UNDP, to say, when you are setting up a system that lets people know that a disaster is coming, it's not enough that they just have the information. There has to be something they can do. So will there be shelters where women can sleep with their children separately from men? If as often is the case, you end up with many female-headed households after disasters because many men and of course women, or even child-headed households. Is there a cash transfer system in place that doesn't rely on ID documents so that people can have cash to access food? Is there some kind of long-term shelter? Is there a livelihood transition strategy? All of those things we're looking at and funding through our early warning systems, so that in the event of that rapid displacement, we're confident it has a people-centred approach at the heart of it that allows people to have autonomy and ownership over how they live as a result of that climate disaster.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Eleni. I'm feeling so excited about this discussion, but I already feel there's um, a huge barrier between the UN agencies, INGOs, and community, and especially then we have displaced community. So how we can promise ourselves, moving forward, how we can make indicators. Also, Eleni mentioned you have a gender lens, but how we can create more inclusive accountability mechanism, and even how we feel we are involving people not only to have consultation, because for us we are advocating for meaningful participation. It's meaningful participation basic of everything to create a inclusion, and it's required partnership with the local actors, with the different actors, without having power dynamic, or just not only ticking the box. It's required understanding, trust, and obviously investment resources. So I know we are almost end of our webinar, but I want to make sure we are going in the COP30. And my question, when I am there as a refugee representation, as a person who are advocating for displaced community, how we feel we have an equal partnership, not only to share our stories or vulnerable stories, but the future. For us, it's very important how we go beyond even humanitarian aid to make a more sustainability, a more equal, equitable, sustainable partnership. So how we can make sure? I know, again, I love to ask this big question, but obviously this big question helping us to challenge ourselves. So I will start how we make sure to bring this funding, these resources for the people, by the people. So I will like to start with Stephanie and then Ali. I know, as I said, it's a
Yes,
big
please.
question, but I love to know how we can move forward.
Stephanie, you want to start with Stephanie, right?
Anyone,
Oh,
anyone.
it
Like,
doesn't matter.
I want
So
answers.
so from my end, let me start, because I'm going to be, a bit brief. But so as committed as I am, I always start with a caveat that, for what it is, we're living in an imperfect world. So we can create, we're fighting essentially for incremental changes. I don't know how far we can achieve that, but I think every single one of us can add a little pebble to the mix, and this is we need to continue doing it now. The good thing that we are seeing, and we're definitely encouraging, is that it's not just public sector, Anila, and private sector who can access our financing. You also have civil society organizations who do that, or not profit organizations, and for me, this is important. This is where it starts shifting from just, power dynamics of communities, let's say of refugee communities, and the state, in a state where they don't have necessarily citizenhood, and it moves to other actors. And we have seen such a push also in the ecosystem. I mean, I remember in recent years, a laudable engagement, I think, in Ugandan refugee settlements from the World Bank. Nothing to do necessarily just with climate, but just really realizing the untapped potential that refugee communities do have. It's not a stagnant population. It's an extremely dynamic population. So the reason I'm flagging this is because you see even big multilateral development players acknowledging and trying to engage with a dimension that often is overlooked. Now, so in that regard, and particularly noting that we have big civil society organizations already accredited with us and engaging with us. We have UN agencies who also in the different remit. I mean, at the end of the day, that's their mandate. That's their that's what they're working towards. I think we do have entry points towards securing that attention to vulnerable populations, and importantly, us as GCF, we have elevated vulnerability as one of our pillars for our 50 by 30 vision. So I'll just conclude by saying that I think it's important that as an organization that is affirmed, and our focus, is firm on engaging and working with vulnerable communities. So I think that is important. We should not take it for granted. It is also important that in the pool of accredited entities through which we channel our finance, we also have entities whose mandates and whose values are a better fit for what your question is posing. And I would say that at a higher level, from a policy perspective, GCF does have a quite ambitious set of policies, and policies that also link with requirements that we want to see that evidence in our funding proposals. Nonetheless, that doesn't mean that things are perfect. I believe that there is an inherent difficulty, and I cannot answer to you now how this may be overcome, but there is an inherent difficulty of players, actors in this ecosystem who deal with bigger sum of monies, how this is going to trickle down to smaller grants for these, down to the ground for multiple communities. There's a natural aversion, I would say, or rather, let me put it differently. Money likes to flow in big tickets. So the smaller grants is left to smaller players. I know that in my corner of GCF, we're currently trying to look at how we're going to deliver on modalities that will enable more direct access to climate finance for indigenous communities and local indigenous peoples and local communities. So that exactly goes to what you're saying. It's like, how do we reach down? I can tell you that it's not going to be easy or straightforward. But there are ideas, so follow this space. Like, over to Stephanie.
Yes.
And I think we have some good examples in our portfolio, particularly the work that we're doing with organizations, like Save the Children in some of the Pacific countries, where we've included in our proposals, firstly, every proposal that comes to GCF has to evidence stakeholder consultation. And I know we're talking about more than consultation. We're talking about the next step, which is involvement, right? That's because it's one thing to ask and it's one thing to help people do. But everything we fund has to evidence that it has been engaged with the community in some shape or form, or it just doesn't get funded. And we have one of the strongest commitments of any climate funder to that. But the Save the Children projects, I think, have some great examples where we've been able to build in small grant facilities into the work that they do, so that there may be a big sum of money that's driving the project, but it's accessible in smaller sums to the communities to make their decisions around. I wanted to pick up, and then I need to run and jump on my flight. I wanted to just comment because you mentioned COP. And, I've had so many conversations with women at COP, and of course, that's how we met. And where people have said to me, women in particular are representing countries or representing communities. They're not quite sure what to do at COP. They haven't been supported to interact in that environment. They don't know who they should talk to, what they should say. So if I can be very, very practical at this stage, and Anila, I think you're an excellent example of this personally and professionally. You have a story to tell. You know your story. So it starts with, what is your story? Because it's the story that connects the heart with the ideas around investment. It is never data and numbers, although they're important. It is your story. So if you're turning up at events like this, even if they're local or national events, not just COP, what is your story? Does it really tell me what's the problem? What could be solutions? And how can I or the other organisation help? Know what you're asking for. Have a very concrete request. What is it? Do you need connections? Do you need funding? Do you need ideas? Do you need the government to change its mind? So know what is it that you need and what you're asking for. And 3, are you asking the right people the right questions? So for GCF, as Eleni has said, we fund big projects. And yes, we have some ways that we can make sure that money goes down communities. But our sister fund, the Adaptation Fund, it's the one that deals in $100,000, $200,000 grants. So it's a very different conversation when you talk to the Green Climate Fund or you talk to the Adaptation Fund. So know who you're asking the questions of. Is this an audience that's going to be receptive and have the means? And so the first was, have the story. Know what you're asking for, know who you're asking, and then 4, give confidence that if people invest or trust in you, that something is going to happen. Be able to say, this is what I can say with confidence will happen if and when you invest in us. And I think knowing just those 4 things will equip you to have very different conversations in these settings. That's when an idea becomes powerful, because you connect with people, you convince them, and you give them an opportunity to do something that brings a change. And if you allow me to end there and run and get on my plane, thank you for your patience and thanks for hosting me today, Anila.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you. See you in COP 30 very soon. Thank you so much. Eleni, I want to request you, as a recommendation, Stephanie share her different kind of, how to ask, whom to ask, with a very concrete action point. What you advise us, how we can connect so we feel more inclusive, feel more a partnership in this kind of communication and this kind of solution, how we can bring more inclusive solutions.
You're asking me, right? I think we need to keep the dialogue on. The channel needs to remain open. We need to hear ideas. I would never claim that we've got all the ideas. We have a lot of blind spots. Everybody has blind spots. So long as people engage with us, I mean, I really welcome feedback. So long as it's constructive and we're all focusing on the direction of how to make how to help us deliver on a mandate in an equitable and I would even say compassionate manner. I think it's important that that dialogue is open. At the same time, it's important, as Steph said, for our limitations to be known, because there's some things that we can't do, there's some things that we can't do. So in that dialogue, we're open to be told of of how we could do things differently, and what our blind spots are, and to be given ideas about things that hadn't even crossed our minds. But our interlocutors also need to be receptive to what we can't do for statutory reasons or for reasons of our business model, and then try to find solutions on that. The exercise I mentioned earlier that is currently ongoing, it was launched recently, of trying to rethink our business model and identify entry points for delivering on direct access to climate finance for indigenous local communities, that is a telling and a fascinating journey because, first of all, we ourselves open up to this possibility. I think it's also a mental thing. Suddenly you need to be told, try to do it, and you open yourself to it. Let's see where this guides us.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Eleni, for your time and your insight and your expertise. We're super excited to
And
have.
may I just end
Sure,
end
sure,
on a
sure.
note that for me it's very important, particularly on the gender front, because a lot of the talk around, particularly around women, um, not just in the climate finance space, but generally, is that everybody keeps emphasizing the women's vulnerability, and I end up reading quite a few funding proposals lumping all women as vulnerable population. And I just want to end on the note that I am a hugely strong believer in human agency, more so in women's agency. So I'd like to, when we speak of women's vulnerability, I would also like at the same time to think of, the huge resources that women have as agents of change. So I'll stop there.
Indeed, we all are agent of change, and that's why we need our position and a power and our voice. Thank you so much, Aline. It's such a powerful discussion with you and with Stephanie.
Thank
Everyone,
you for creating the
thank
space,
you. Thank you
Anila.
so much. That's our promise to keep connecting and creating the spaces and knowledges. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for who are watching us live on LinkedIn. We have a little bit technical hiccups, but super happy to have this conversation. We're gonna share this in our YouTube as well, and please watch us in New Women Connectors. How we can keep building up our knowledges and bringing these experts like we had Alini and Stephanie, where they shared the work they are doing and how they are bringing the barriers, but also how they are trying to remove the barriers, but also bringing the climate readiness belongs to everyone because our work continues together and we need to connect these knowledges. Thank you so much. Stay tuned and see you very, very soon.
Thank you.